Hi, welcome back to Reimagining Us. I'm Nichole Argo, the Executive Director of the Together Up Institute.
And I'm Scott Hutchison, Executive Director of E Pluribus Unum. All right, Nichole, tell us about this week's episode.
So today we have as our guests four members, former members, I guess, and always members of the Needham Resilience Network. And this is an organization that was started a few years ago in a western suburb of Boston. It has 30 leaders from across every sector of society, through race, religion, socioeconomic status, civic groups, partisan groups, and we have also representation from the town of Needham. This group met for 2 years, once a month, and focused on anchoring in the concept of belonging, learning skills for communicating across differences, building relationships, just getting to know one another as individuals, complex individuals, and then solving a local problem. Each of them were leaders in the Needham Resilience Network over the last couple of years, and they're going to tell us a little bit about their experience. So why don't we start? Let's go around and introduce yourself. Just say your name and a little bit about who you are.
Rabbi Jay Perlman. I serve as rabbi at Temple Beth Shalom in Needham.
All right. My name is Marcus Nelson, and I was elected to the Select Board in Needham in the spring of April 2021 and served for 3 years until this past April of 2024.
I'm John Schlittler. I'm the police chief for the town of Needham, and I'm in my 29th year of law enforcement.
Right. I'm Bala Venkat. I'm a software engineer by profession in AI and robotics and an active member of the Indian community of Needham and the Needham Council of Arts and Culture. I'm also the co-founder of the Purple Wings, which is a financial literacy program for women, and most recently a Bolly X dance instructor focusing on dance fitness through Bollywood dance.
Great. Thank you all for being with us today. So, tee us up, Nichole.
All right. Well, why don't we focus this first segment on how it all began? And I mean by that, how did the network come into being and how did you come into the network? So thinking back to 2022, when the network first launched, what was going on in the community at that time and what were your feelings about it? As best as you can remember, it's been a few years. And why don't we start with you, Bala?
Looking back, I think those were certainly trying times, given that we were still in the midst of the pandemic. I'm sure we were all impacted in one way or the other, both physically and mentally due to COVID. And I think with the long-term confinement that we were all sort of, in home for a long time due to quarantine, definitely we saw a lot of mental wellness issues, and that manifested in many ways. Countrywide, we saw a lot of hate incidents that were rising steadily, and Needham was no exception to that. We would see some really offensive Facebook posts and people shouting slurs out while driving. So that was very disheartening, and I was personally very sad because we had moved to Needham around 2013, and at that time we had chosen Needham because it was in the Home magazine rated as #1 town to raise children in a very safe environment, and to see that change was definitely very concerning for myself and my family's safety and for the whole community.
What do you think, Chief Schlittler?
Obviously it was a difficult time across our country and obviously within our community, and a lot of that focus was on, criminal justice, policing, law enforcement, and so forth. And so it was something that was, I think initially hard for us to deal with, because if we see the negative, profile of what people thought of police. And I think generally in Needham, we've always had a pretty good reputation, and we've, had a good, relationship with our community, and it was being tested at that time. And I think it was something as, when the Resiliency Network came out, and, they were looking for community leaders, obviously law enforcement was at the forefront. And I thought it was a great opportunity for myself in our department to explain the why, the how, and what we do, that might be able to explain a little bit more to our community so they understand where we're coming from. But also for us to have a chance to see where other people in our community might be coming from.
Marcus, what are your thoughts?
I think I have a lot of thoughts. And when I go back to that moment in time, I think for myself personally first, being elected to the select board was a really big deal for our town. To be the first person of color elected in the town's history, I feel like there was a lot of weight on my shoulders to be the first and hopefully not to be the last. But when I think about that process and hearing from people telling me that I shouldn't do that or I should start here or do these things, it only lit a fire under me to become a person that is able to unite people, not through anything negative, but to bring people together in a positive manner and to be a bridge builder. So to do that, you have to be willing to listen and to listen to understand. And that time, like Chief said, it was really trying time between the community and I think the history of policing in general. And I think some of that generational trauma kind of flared up in the world that we live in the country that we live in, and then in aspects in Needham, in the town that we live in. And the hate that has been spewed in all different manners in the town, I feel like was kind of at like an all-time high. So when this opportunity came together to have town leadership, to collaborate together, and do our best to come up with some kind of solution proactively on how we can make sure the town is as safe as it can be, but also that the town knows who each other are and know who the leaders are. And if anything should arise, how do we come together to be a voice of reason, to be people that are understanding where everyone's kind of coming from, and then using all of our resources together to have a network that responds to those things in a manner that is delicate and in a manner that is making sure that people are feeling seen, heard, and safe.
Yeah, that's great. Rabbi Jay?
Yeah, certainly. Certainly in the broader community, we experienced tremendous atomization, as we were all pushed into our corners and pushed into our physical spaces. And I think that the amplification of intolerance and the levels of hatred and misunderstanding, it was interesting certainly to see, and disturbing of course to see how it was that atomization was in direct proportion to the level of dissonant discourse and of antipathy and hatred, and how it is that we need each other. And that as we certainly saw this in our own congregation as well, that people felt weaker because people were confined to their homes. People were under new stresses, certainly, in terms of their own families and their structures and their children. The simple things such as just having conversations or educating our kids, that elevated stresses. And so I think that we were all turned to 11, and we were in unfamiliar waters. And so it was it presented a tremendous rupture to just our way of life. And what the Needham Resiliency Network really did for us, through my experience, is that it invited us to consider how it is that we can intentionally craft community that is truly healthy, that is grounded in a shared understanding of our ethics and values, and to build a measure of alignment that enables us to see each other, acknowledge each other, respond to each other's humanity. And in doing so, it enabled us to have conversations that were both easy, to build relationships, and then also to have conversations that were difficult. And so in many ways, I think that the NRN was incredibly refreshing. And so when the opportunity presented itself to participate, I want to say that you had me at hello. It's sort of like I ran to come and to participate and feel blessed to have done so.
Nichole, can I ask a question? I know we're going to get into the work and all the great things that happen, but I've heard words today talking about hate and discord, the need to provide safety, how race played into it, people's attitudes about law enforcement, about intolerance. Those are not things people run to fix all the time. What made you say, I'm going to step into this? We'll get into how it was formed, but the whole idea of what made you come and run to this?
Yeah, for me personally, I certainly felt the lack of belonging when I had initially moved to the town. It was not very diverse, and my children also felt that in school. There was definitely some bullying incidents that happened in my own neighborhood, which was unfortunate. And so I thought, what else can I do? Like, I have to make a difference and make it a safe space for my children. The only way to do this is by education. And so I really started to step into community work and, find every opportunity where I could volunteer, whether that was be a home parent in school, be on the parent-teacher council, any opportunity that arose, so I could partner with everybody else in the community to really get to know one another, really educate ourselves. I feel like lack of education is what causes this issue. And so when NRN came about, and I was nominated by my Indian community to represent the community, I took that as an opportunity as to be part of the program.
Chief.
Well, I think, as Marcus had spoken to earlier, the history of policing, is something that it hasn't been great through time. And I think that's the message that was out there. And, as difficult as it was for us, my officers that are out there in the street doing that job every day, it's difficult. They see a lot of bad things. They have to deal with a lot of bad things. And they're humans. We're all humans. And I think it was, we could have looked at it and said, all right, you know what, we're gonna tighten up, we're gonna close the shop, we're just gonna build a wall, and we're gonna stay there. I thought this was a great opportunity for us to get the messaging out about what we do and what does the Needham Police Department do, because I think historically, when you look at law enforcement, they keep everything tight to the vest, the good things, the bad things. And, I just didn't think that, it was a good message, not just to the community, but to the police department, not to get out there and spread that message and work within our community, because we need the community to support us and to help us. And I thought it was a great opportunity for us to push our department forward.
Marcus.
Yeah, I would say, kind of like what Bala said, the belonging part. Me running for select board, there was a lot of pushback from certain people and people that have been involved in town government for a long time, asking me kind of what I've done to deserve this, and multiple things that kind of, like I said earlier, just made me more anxious to get in there and be a part of changing that narrative. And my whole life, I've been someone that has been able to connect with people and connect people. And when I think about the town of Needham and who makes up the people that are running that town, and you don't see anybody that looks like you don't see any mirrors. You see a lot of windows, but also, I think having mirrors in people that don't look like everyone else in positions of leadership will encourage other people to want to come and be a part of a town that is a more diverse representation of the people that it serves. So I want people to come to our town and feel like it doesn't matter what part of the world I come from or who I identify as, this is a place where I feel like is home for me and my family. And if this was going to help do that, then like Rabbi Perlman said, had me at hello.
Yeah, I would say that that for me, look, a Jewish frame and a spiritual frame is looking out at the world acknowledges that the world is fractured and that the world is broken, and that in some way we were created with a responsibility and a task to make it what it ought to be. In some respects, when you read from, for example, like the book of Genesis, we're in those stories now, and you see that those opening stories of Genesis, the Garden of Eden and Noah's Ark and the Tower of Babel, you find that the world just couldn't be the way that God wanted the world, like through that narrative lens. And so what ends up happening is that God, in the 12th chapter of Genesis, God partners with Abraham. God reaches out to a human being and says, I can't do this. Like somehow a limited God, if you will, even though God doesn't self-describe God's self as being limited, God says, I need human partners in order to create the society, create the world, create the community as it really ought to be. And the truth of the matter is that no matter what we do, whether we're working in a company or in a community or in a congregation, we know that healthy communities are not created by default, they're created by design. And design requires partnership. Authentic, grounded, thoughtful, understanding, patient, sense of humor, dedicated partnership.
You know, it's been a few months since we all met, and I had forgotten how eloquent you all are. And also, I'm cognizant that I'm asking you this question, or Scott's question is coming to you after 2 years in the network. But in our research, what we hear from most Americans is that while they want to engage in work like what you did, they are worried. They have doubts. Will it work? Will I be able to be my best self? Will others? What will the costs of that be? And so I don't know if it's possible. I want to bring you back to that time because each of you gave an answer that was like, you had me at hello for my various reasons, right? But did you have doubts? What was hard about saying yes to this?
Yeah, I mean, I didn't have any doubts about joining the network. Obviously, wanted to be part of the problem solving. The time frame definitely seemed like a long time frame. I know we had a 2-year plan. However, I was trying to think about the now and the next few months, and I like to take one day at a time. So I was like, all right, let's do this. And, the fact that we were all going to join together with all the different leaders representing different community was very encouraging, very motivating. And for me, it felt like a journey of personal growth for myself and also, community coming together. Yes, there were moments of doubt on like, how are we going to do this? And, do we have the right tools and how are we going to open up to each other and create those bonds, but just that hope that we're working for a greater cause was really motivating for me, and for me it was a no-brainer, and I felt honored to have been asked to be part of this initiative, and it was definitely exciting.
So hope was stronger than doubt.
Hope was stronger than that, yes.
How about you, John?
Yeah, I think, when you're in a community and change is the thing that people are so afraid of. They're so afraid of opening up. When they see Marcus running for select board, that's changed. I mean, there has been system in place with, you're comfortable with, and it's 100 miles an hour you're going through every day. When I come into work, it piles up. You're so focused on what your mission is within the department that sometimes you forget to look outside. And, change can be good. And, when we have that ability to change, it was something that you're apprehensive. I was very apprehensive in the beginning because, we had been taking a beating and, we've been threatened and so forth. And, and some of that, hey, that's the job we do and that's the history coming up again. But I was apprehensive, but, I thought that this would be, that time you get to meet people in the community, so many people that you might not have had dealings with before. It's a difficult job. You're making decisions in a snap of a second. So, but as long as we're open and we're willing to look at, our process in the police department and how we interact, I think we can, move and be a really good part of this community.
I have no doubts about that. Okay, Marcus and Jay, doubts, what was at stake for you? And the reason I'm asking this is that we know our listeners worry about this stuff, and I want them to hear from you, like, were you there at one point too, and what was that like?
Oh, absolutely. I would say coming into it, I know it was something that I wanted to do. When I thought about the length of it and the amount of people that were involved to start and not really having a direction, absolutely there were doubts. And when I think about us and our personalities, how we identify, what we look like, and as the chief was saying, it's a hard job being someone in law enforcement. And then also, when I just think about myself or Bala or Rabbi Perlman, as far as faith, as far as what we look at, what we look like when we walk out the door is something we can't change about ourselves. So it's hard enough being a person of color or someone who identifies or believes in whatever faith or religion that you have. And some of those things you can't hide just by the way that you carry yourself. So you walk out the door, you're nervous sometimes. And I think walking around Needham, something I learned when I first got there to now is at night I used to wear my name tag when I worked at the YMCA, just because I know it's a town that it's supposed to be safe and it's supposed to be all these different things. And for the most part, it is. But I still know that I'm a Black man before I'm anything else. And that's what I'm seen as when I take steps or when I do things, when people don't know I'm a part of the community or that I live there. And it's just one of those things that you kind of grow up innately with that generational trauma of when you are born into this world, we are born on different bases, right? You know, and some people have the privilege to start off on second or third base, and some people are at home plate, and it's really tough to kind of get going, to get that base hit, if you will, to be seen and to be acknowledged and to be respected for who you are and what you do and not what you look like. You can't fake the feeling of belonging, right? Or wanting to be even celebrated for being an individual. I think that is more important than actually belonging or feeling like you have to fit in. Because I say that we weren't born to fit in anything. I was like, we're born to be who we are, and those individual personalities and the way that we think and the way that we feel and the way that we come across and interact with one another, that's what I want everybody to want to be, the best versions of themselves, and then everybody else can kind of adapt. And if we can adapt in a way that celebrates that individuality, once again, that's the community that I want to be a part of.
Rabbi Jay, tell us, did you have doubts? How did that pan out?
So for me, it wasn't so much having doubts. It was more of an understanding that there are no guarantees. Like, is this really going to work? And one of the things that NRN did exceptionally well is that it recognized that the work can't take place, that we can't really partner with each other effectively, meaningfully, successfully, unless we actually create relationships that are grounded in aligned values, aligned understandings, mutual respect, honoring each other. And so the ability to create those kinds of connections amongst the people who are in the room enabled people to let their shoulders down, to share their stories, for people to get to know each other as human beings, foundationally, functionally, firstly. And when we create, and this is what NRN really enabled us to do by bringing so many different people from so many different corners of the broader community together, it enabled us to really talk about not just the individual situation, but it's the ongoing work of who are we as a town? Who do we want to be?
Having those leaders right there gave us an opportunity to really bring up some issues. For instance, our school superintendent was there as part of our meetings, and I had some concerns about some issues at school, and it was just easy for me to just bring it up there, because a lot of times you don't know who you want to reach out to when you hear about these incidents, and just having somebody there as a representation, I think, was really helpful, and it really helped us build those partnership to work together.
The light didn't just get generated in those meetings, that the relationships actually, they got sparked outside of those meetings. So we were calling each other and getting on the phone, and what do we do? And we become thought partners around the different things that are going on in our community, and that felt really great.
Such a strong network. I mean, it's something, I think one of the biggest concerns was, is this going to be a flash in the pan? Is this for people just to check the box and move on? And as difficult as it was, with a time commitment and everybody so busy in their own lives, and it was important to keep that going, but it's built such a strong network. I can't even tell you how many times people from the network have reached out to me with questions, and I think probably prior to that they wouldn't have felt comfortable. They have my contact and they reach out, and that's hey, that's a building block for us.
And coming off that, something that Rabbi Jay said is the respect factor. I think when we walked in that room for the first time and had those first very intentional conversations where we kind of dressed ourselves down and the respect wasn't just given to us. I think we earned the respect of each other with the way that we interacted and the way that we answered questions. And I think when we took away our titles and who we are in the community from that aspect, then to see each other for the humans that we are, that helped build the relationships and bring them to a different light.
I want to segue from exactly that, because we're talking about respect and honesty and the ability to call upon these relationships, but really because they were formed by design, right, according to these principles. And so if you'll remember, the first 9 months, we really focused a lot on skill building. And What that meant for us was learning to communicate to understand instead of persuade, learning how to listen with curiosity for values and emotions rather than viewpoints. Also coming to an agreement about how we would communicate, not as a group representative and not as thinking of someone else as a group representative, but as seeing our complex individual selves and calling people in when there was a breach of our communications agreement, right? When there was something that could have been harmful or whatnot, and being able to call them in and say, hey, I see this happen. Did you want to say it differently? So we came up with, the network itself chose its own communication guidelines and then practiced them. And I think that's really important because it helps to build that trust and that expectation. So thinking back on that period, was there a skill or an insight or an experience that was challenging or useful to you, like something that stood out from that really impacted you or that you find yourself using today?
I was just going to say the listening part. I think, as a society, we're instant right now. We look and we're on the phones. We want instant return. At a tendency where you tend to move on quicker than you can think or talk. And actually sitting back and listening to the stories and listening to the words of the members was, it was impactful because, you can hear the tone, you can hear the way they're talking, you can either hear the joy or the pain or whatever it might be. And if you're not listening and kind of thinking about the next step, you're not going to catch that. And that's where the whole honesty and part comes, and genuine part of it is because when you listen, you can now pick up on those subtle hints in the way they're carrying themselves or the way they're telling their story. That was just, it's a definite tool that I use a lot more, especially at work when people are running by and like, hey, I need this, this is the problem, this is what we have to deal with them. A lot of times you're like, yeah, okay, just deal with it. But now you kind of stop and you take it all in and say, all right, let's see where we have to go from here.
Yeah, I agree. And I'm glad that we focused the first few months on communication and relationship building. I think those are foundational building blocks for any functioning body, whether that's our family or community or a corporate organization. We all communicate, but are we really communicating and listening, as the chief said, with intent to really understand others' values and emotions, or are we just listening to talk next, and persuade our views on them? So with those recurring meetings, I would say we got better and better at really listening to each other, and some of the exercises that Nichole and Beth gave us with the breakout sessions really helped us, form those bonds by really listening to those stories of one another and understanding one another. And I think I have certainly taken that away from our time there to be an active listener, and I try to put that hat on every time in my day-to-day life and talk less and listen more and give everybody that space. And everybody needs that space, and everybody wants to be heard and have a voice at the table. So it's important. I think listening is an important skill.
And I think having a voice at the table is something that is so profound, to have a voice or to be a voice for the voiceless. Correct. For the people that are not in the rooms that we're in and that don't get an opportunity to tell or share their stories. And we don't speak for every member of the community that we represent, but there's enough people that reach out to you and have questions and things, and we're able to bring those to each other. I feel like that in its sense is something that was that helped to really make it real, I would say. To make it real in the sense that we're not doing this for ourselves. We're not in this and trying to better our community, like the community, just for like, I want to be able to do this or I want to be able to do that. I want everybody every life that we touch, every person that we interact with that has any kind of opinion or thoughts or experiences to know that we are doing our best to making sure that enough people in the room that are making decisions, people that are out in the community that are getting things done, are hearing those things, and that we're listening to the responses that we're getting from them and then putting them into practice.
I will say the icebreakers were a little corny at times, but I know they had purpose, right? So
Always a purpose.
Just to keep it interesting.
yeah,
right?
it did. Yeah, and it was like I guess it's in a way it was to break down your outer shell,
Your wall.
and to get in there. But There were times I'm like, oh, no. What's going to go on
We
today?
second that. I second that emotion. Yeah, I was like,
Point noted, as a co-facilitator for the next cohort, I will keep that in mind to make sure we have some interesting icebreakers.
Can I ask you a question?
Of
Okay.
course.
I love hearing all of this, and I love learning about how structured it was going in, and rules and setting parameters and stuff like that, which actually is how you create an institution. It's how you create something that has a longer life. That being said, what would you say to somebody who, I live in Colfax, Louisiana. I don't have a network. What personally did you bring? Are you special people? Do you have special, needs and desires that the everyday person doesn't have? Like, what brought that all together? And what would you say to somebody who's like, well, I don't have that, or I'm not a police chief, or taking that first step to building something that is really what we know in our work is something that people want, and you have to practice it, and you have to create something around it. What would you say to that person who's just listening to that part and saying, wow, that sounds great, I wish I lived in Needham?
I would say something along the lines that Needham could be in any community if there's enough people willing to take a chance to make a change, because change is necessary. And without changing, without being willing to grow and to learn and to work with other people, it's just going to continue to be the same community that you've been in. So I would say the ideas that you have, to either write them down or talk to people within your circle, within the community or your the people that you spend the most amount of time with.
Yeah, I was just going to add on to the change and empowerment and challenging your fear. I think if you're a change maker, this is for you, right? We all want, change for betterment. And the one thing that's common between all of us leaders is that we all want to make this a better place, our town a better place to live. And if you want to make that change, you have to be part of the change and, part of the problem solving. So, prior to NRN, we did not have any other body that did this work. And the fact that, it was a fear of unknown for us, and it's a challenge that we took on, and we worked towards it. It's not going to be an easy process, as Marcus said. It's going to be a work in progress. You're going to face a lot of challenges, and it's all new learnings for us too. But doing so, we all grow together, individually and as a community. So yeah, I think anyone that wants to bring about change and definitely should come up with a foundation like NRN.
I just want to say on that note that not all of the NRN, I'm calling them leaders, and you all are in various different ways, but we have some folks who don't consider themselves leaders, right?
Right. And I use leader for a word, because if you're there and you're taking that first step to be out of your comfort zone, you're a leader. Like, you don't have to have a title.
I
you
love
are
that.
a leader by default.
absolutely.
So
That's
that's
right.
why I call everybody a leader here.
And I do that too, and I'm only saying it, clarifying it, because I think a lot of our listeners who might not see themselves as leaders, I could see them in the same process we did, who could be in the room and making those connections, and by breaking out of their fears and taking on the discomfort and building something, suddenly opening the door for others. But Jay, you didn't get a chance to respond to this one. Did you want to?
No, totally good. I mean, I think that just in this particular line, I think that our responsibility with respect to the partnership that we have shared, building trust, building relationship, surfacing issues that are celebratory, surfacing issues that are challenging, navigating problem solving, all of this, doing the ongoing work of crafting healthy community is really important amongst us, amongst those who have agency are sitting around the table. But in truth, I think that some of the important work that we have to do is to not just sort of, if you will, create this circle of leadership engagement, but what are we doing and how do we then bring those values into the community so that we're creating a culture within our community? Because as has been said so thoughtfully around our circle, is that we represent a corner of the community. We're speaking for, and people are speaking through us, and we're trying to lift up questions and issues. And so the question then becomes, how do we take what we have discussed, and then how do we then bring that back to our circle of engagement, of empowerment, of agency, and how do we then, if you will, operationalize the conversations that we have taken place? It's all well and good for me to learn this story, this account, this issue, this perception, But I've only done part of the work. If I myself feel enlightened and empowered and inspired by what we've just talked about, I then have the responsibility then to go back to my circle. And so what am I then doing to widen that, bring that understanding in such a way so that everybody in that circle, in the most meaningful of ways, is then working together? Because the truth of the matter is, who's in charge of building our community? Everybody's in charge of building our community. Every citizen is a partner, regardless of whether they have a title or not. And while it is that may sound overly poetic, in the truth, that's the pros of creating public life, if we want it to be. If we want it to be.
So I think what might be most useful for listeners is to hear from each of you, what's like the biggest thing you learned or took away from this, and how is it present in your life today, if at all? Don't mean to make assumptions, but how has this changed you?
Understanding that nothing can be done alone, and that the whole purpose of everything that we're doing here is about building community within the community that we have, and just being a voice, but not the only voices that are a part of impacting the way that we think, the way that we want to move the town forward, and the way that we come together and do that. So what I've learned more than anything in how I apply it in my everyday life, I apply it in my job, is that you need other people in order to do really anything. You know, nothing can really be done truly by yourself. And the more that you kind of feel that and go through that and understand that, the possibilities are endless.
Yeah, I think partnership, as you said, Marcus, is really important. This is what we learned over the years, is not just working together in NRN. I think some of the things that came out of NRN in partnering with our other organizations like the Human Rights and the Rotary Club, we were able to accomplish a lot more. We had some amazing events in town that we co-created as part of the Needham Diversity Initiative. We had a summit where we talked about belonging and a roadmap for change with all the different representation. And then we, started the very first multicultural festival in town. We had those in our schools before, but just bringing the whole town together for a festival to really educate one another about our cultures and our differences was huge. And we had about 700 people that attended last year, and that was a huge win for us as a community. And everybody wanted more. They wanted to do this every year, so we just did that again 2 weeks ago, our second festival. And
It was a success.
it was a huge success, and this time in partnership with our high school principal and the kids. My son, who's a senior, was excited to volunteer with his friends and to really, make this a huge success. So just creating those traditions for our community, not just within NRN, but in the broader community, is a huge win, I think, for us as an NRN group. And, bringing people together, I think it's been great.
I think of, relationships and friendships, and as Marcus alluded to earlier, building bridges. It's not something that's going to die off. It's something that I think is you continue it and keep growing, even if it's a little bit at a time. You're now, you're building that foundation of one community. It's going to take a lot of work, and it's going to take a lot of persistence, but the building blocks and the foundation are in place.
I think that my deepest appreciation just comes from a place of gratitude that the town and its leaders had an awakening that enabled them to step into this work. Because once there was a genesis, once there was a shared sort of like sense of what promised land could look like this is what we're trying to do together, are we willing to even give it a try? And there was an openness and a willingness to listen and to share and to bring stories and to build together, to co-create. That created a certain amount of energy and excitement, and I agree. I think that it's just going to continue to blossom over the years to come.
I appreciate all the stories, the reflections here today, you all. And you reminded me of something that when you all were just talking about bridge building and the divisions, the possibilities, the ways things could go, John Powell is someone that we'll be talking to in this series, and he talks a lot about bridging and breaking, right? We're not just a bigger we, we're either bridging to create that belonging in that bigger we, or we're breaking. And when we bridge, we turn towards each other and say, okay, let's do this. Let's understand, let's build. And when we're breaking, we turn away from each other. And there's not a static moment. There's never a moment that you're not doing one of those things. And I think that, Scott, I'm just throwing this out there, but I think that is a message for our listeners who aren't already involved in something or don't necessarily see themselves as a leader. Like, there's not a moment in our daily life when we're not either turning towards or turning away.
Well, thank you all so much for being with us and being part of Reimagining Us.
Reimagining Us is available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, and wherever you get your podcasts. Learn more at nextchapterpodcast.com/reimaginingus and togetherup.org/reimagining.